about your hopes and desires, and he was actually having me evaluated by the plant psychiatrist. So we go off in another room, and I talk with this guy. He says, "What's going on with you and your dad, John?" I said, "Well, I want to be an airline pilot. That's what I want to do. I love to fly airplanes. Dad wants me to be an attorney or a doctor, and he says I can earn enough money to buy my own airplane. I don't want my own airplane. I just want to fly an airplane." And Dad says that's just like being a bus driver. And I said, "Well, so what's wrong with being a bus driver?" So anyway, we go back into Dad's office, and Dad said, "Well, did you guys get straightened out?" And Plas says, "Well, Mr. Lear, I think he has some pretty good ideas for what he wants to do." Dad threw us both out of the office then.
Well, it was a love because just by reading some of the writings you've done, John, and your background, it followed you all your life into different facets as well. I mean, ending up as a pilot for the CIA. Would you do it again today? If today's CIA said, "Hey, John Lear, we need some help," would you fly for them?
No, it's different today.
It is.
Everything's different today. I've been retired 5 years since May of 2000 when Kitty Hawk International went bankrupt. I was flying the L-1011 for them, and I had took all my licenses. I had them laminated and framed, put on the wall, so I would never be tempted to use them again. I canceled all my aviation subscriptions, and you know what, George? I don't even look up in the sky anymore. When I flew, and I've talked to a lot of friends that flew when I was flying in the 60s and 70s and 80s, I flew in the best of times. I flew the greatest equipment and flew the most interesting missions, but it's not like that anymore. In those days, we knew who the good guys were and who the bad guys were.
Right.
And these days, you don't. You don't even dare get in the business because you don't know who the good guys and bad guys are.
And I bet you knew all those. You knew the Jaegers. You knew everybody during this era.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, while we're on that, I'd like to note the untimely passing of Scott Crossfield, who was killed a few weeks ago.
That's right. He was a giant. He was a giant
of
in the
mine,
business.
In a weather-related crash in a Cessna 210. Scott flew the Douglas D-558 skyrocket to Mach 2, and he also became the first man to exceed Mach 2 and flew the X-15 to Mach 2.97. Now, I want us to set the record straight tonight, George, on who really was the first pilot to exceed the speed of sound in level flight. Chuck Yeager has always been reported to be the first,
yes.
But Chuck was less than gracious, acknowledging who really was the first, and less than gracious regarding other pilots' accomplishments. When Scott died a few weeks ago, Yeager made the comment that Crossfield was always taking chances. A few years ago, Yeager had this to say about the nonstop round-the-world flight in the Voyager by Gina Yeager and Dick Rutan, and I quote, "A monkey could have done it."
Oh, man.
Yeager has always been relentless in his criticism and dislike for civilian test pilots, even going so far as to say in one interview, but as airplane drivers, they really weren't as skilled as military guys. Now remember, George, this is the same Chuck Yeager who personally crashed one of the only two Lockheed NF-104s in the aerospace training program. He not only screwed up the climb profile, this was the airplane that was built for the astronauts to test their skills in, and it also was built to go over 120,000 feet. Chuck not only screwed up the climb profile, he not only screwed up the pitch over, he screwed up the descent so badly that he had to bail out with the loss of the airplane and the termination of the program.
Right. Wasn't there a segment of him in the movie?
Yes,
was it The Right Stuff?
They glorified it, too.
Yeah.
Chuck should have been fired. Personally, I think a trained monkey could have done better, but the person who really broke the sound barrier for the first time in level flight was Slick Goodland, test pilot for Bell Aircraft, who built the X-1. Slick made 26 flights in the X-1 before they handed it over to the Army and exceeded Mach 1 on at least 2 of those flights. The Air Force, however, wanted to hog the limelight and the glory and the credit, so the data tapes were impounded, and General Boyd, who was head of the Flight Test Center at what then was known as Muroc, chose Yeager. And even though there were other pilots equal to or more qualified than Yeager, General Boyd picked Yeager for the Mach 1 attempt because he felt Yeager was the most expendable. Slick Goodland passed away last October, never having achieved the recognition for his achievement, mainly because of the Air Force politics.
And he just kept quiet about it.
Yep, he just kept quiet about it. And you can go on the Internet and look at Slick Goodland. There's several websites of his accomplishments.
Now, you're quite the person, John. I mean, here we are. We're going to be talking about UFOs and some incredible thoughts and theories you have about that. But you also, and I noticed this today with gold up over $720 an ounce now, you own a gold mine, don't you?
Yeah, it's the one of two certificated permitted gold mines in Clark County, and it's out in Gold Butte, about 50 miles east of Las Vegas. And I love it out there because, you know, there isn't another person for 50 miles. It's high desert country, 4,600 feet. It's old Indian country, and I just love to go out there and weld and pound nails and get ready. And we're just about set to start milling in about 2 weeks.
I think you're going to hit the mother lode?
Well, it's a vein, George, that runs about a mile and a half, and people have worked this vein for many years, but it has various concentrations, and we may make a little bit, but, you know, basically it's an excuse for me to get out in the open air and enjoy myself.
How old are you now, John?
63.
Oh, you're still young. You are still young.
Yeah.
Well, good for you. Now, how did you, because this started back in the 80s, how did you get interested? I mean, here you are, you know, a test pilot, airline captain. All of a sudden, you're interested in unidentified flying objects, UFOs. How in the heck did that start?
I'll tell you exactly how it happened. I was over at a friend's house across town that I knew for years and years. I was walking through his living room. On the table, there was a book called Missing Time by Bud Hopkins, and I picked this up, and I kind of thumbed through it, and I said, the guy's name was Al Newell, and I said, Al, can I borrow this book? He said, sure. I took it home, and George, I don't know what came over me, but when I read that book, I said, this is real. And then shortly after that, we had a reunion of Southeast Asia pilots here in Las Vegas. And a friend of mine, Greg Wilson, who was a Raven, and you know who the Ravens were. They were the people that were taken out of the Air Force, given civilian ID, and they flew for the U.S. ambassador in Laos against the Pathet Lao and North Vietnamese. And really a gung-ho guy. And we got to talking at this reunion, and I said, you know, where all you been? Because he flew A-10s. He says, oh, different places. You know, I was over in Bentwaters. I said, Bentwaters? Well, what about that incident in 1980 where a saucer supposedly landed? He said, John, I was there. He said, I didn't see it, but I was confined to quarters, but I know the guys who did. And I thought, well, there's the second thing. And so then I just got interested and started researching. And I once took a trip throughout, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and I met all the guys that were in it. I went there and talked to them. I talked to Benowitz. I talked to Colonel Ernie Edwards. Linda Howe and I went on a trip from Albuquerque down to Roswell to talk to Clifford Stone. And when I came back, I said, man, I can't believe it. This stuff is really real. And that's when I wrote that first statement that floats around the Internet that starts out with Giordano Bruno. And
yeah,
whatever.
Okay. Did you, because of your background in aviation, also because of your name, a strong name, did that help you trying to open up doors to investigate UFOs or trying to talk to people who might not have spoken to you? Did that help?
I don't think so. I'm trying to remember of any incidents where it would. The only one that it did kind of help me is I went to research the base at Dulce, New Mexico, and I pulled into town driving my old GMC truck, and I checked into a hotel, and I had the name of Gabe Valdez, who was the highway patrol guy there, and I called up Gabe, and I said, my name is John Lear. I'd like to chance to meet you. He said, John, we already met. And I said, we did? And he said, yeah, 10 years ago, you flew in here in a Learjet with Dean Martin's girlfriend and a load of steaks for Dean Martin. He was shooting a movie here. I was the guy that met you at the airport.
I love it.
So he came over to the hotel, and his shift was 10 o'clock at night to 6 in the morning. And I spent 8 hours with Gabe Valdez, in his patrol car, roaming around the mountains at night around Dulce. And I'll tell you, it was an interesting experience.
John, you've got me interested about that Apollo 1 fire. So when we come back, let's talk a little bit about that. Our special guest tonight, John Lear. I'm George Noory. This is Coast to Coast AM. I'll tell you about that song in a moment. When we come back, hey, the book that we put out with Bill Burns called Worker in the Light is available for pre-orders at Amazon.com. And the book comes out on September 19th. I'm taking part of my proceeds, and I'm going to give them back. This is me now, not through the network.